Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made for this month's A Punched Out Thursday to Die For. In A Punched Out Thursday to Die For, we use our punches and our dies to create scrapbooking layouts. This month, I was thinking that I wanted to try using a sketch. I used to use sketches all the time, and I haven't used them as much as I used to, so I thought I would check out the Paper Issues Facebook group. If you're not already a member of the Facebook group, I would highly recommend it. I find that they have a lot of really great sketches and scrap lift opportunities and challenges, and I just really like it. So I found this particular sketch that I thought would be perfect for this layout. It has two small photos, and then it has a banner on the top and a banner on the bottom. And I love to include banners on my layouts, so I printed this out and I grabbed two smaller photos, and I'm creating another layout that is Halloween themed. I just can't seem to get Halloween off of my mind this year. I've been doing a lot of Christmas scrapbooking in the last few weeks, and I was in the mood to try something a little different. For this layout, I'm using My Mind's Eye collection called Happy Haunting. This was a collection that I purchased way back when I used to shop at Tuesday Morning all the time. And I was laughing as I looked through what embellishments I had for this collection. There were so many chipboard sheets. It was, I guess, way back when their chipboard packs were $1.99, and so I must have, every time I went to Tuesday Morning, found a chipboard sheet and said, oh, I should grab this, not realizing that I already had them. So I ended up with quite a few, and so I thought it was time to make a dent in this collection. I also had a paper pad and some ephemera and brads from this collection. So I started off with my two photos. I mounted both of them on one of the pattern papers that kind of read as a solid, like an off-white color. And then I mounted them again on some orange pattern paper. And then I put a very thin border of a dark gray around the photo. So lots of matting, but other than the orange paper, there's only a little bit of the other two showing. I use a banner die and I cut the banner out twice, one for the top, one for the bottom. And it's kind of a plaid, a gray, orange, and off-white plaid. And then I started adding the embellishments to my page. I'm going to create three main clusters. You could see them taking form on the page now. On the left, I have a skeleton, and I have some circular elements in each of the clusters. Before I added the elements to the page, I used my Distress ink, you could see it off to the right, in black soot, and I inked the edges of all of them just to kind of bring everything together. And I always love the way it looks when the edges of things are a little bit darker. I apologize for the fact that the layout is on an angle. You could still see everything that I'm doing, but it just kind of looks a little odd. And that's something that I want to try to improve in 2025. I want to get some equipment and upgrade my filming so that I'm not constantly apologizing for things being on angles or things being blurry. I want to make that a little bit more polished so that you guys can enjoy the videos a little bit more and I can enjoy the process a little bit more as well. I think that I'm pretty happy with the way that I have all the elements arranged, so I'm going to start attaching them together. I will usually use a little bit of adhesive and attach things together very loosely just because I want to make sure that I like the way that everything looks and I'm happy with the arrangement. And I do usually go back and make some changes. And I think that it's really important to have that ability, especially if you're me and you're constantly changing your mind about where you like things. The part of the layout that I struggled with the most was the cluster that's on top of the two photos. I started off with this witch's hat embellishment, which I really like, but I didn't like the way it looked when the banner was tucked into that cluster. So I'm going to end up moving the witch's hat to the cluster on the right-hand side of the layout. I use two different embellishments. One says poison caution, the other one says be very afraid. And I move them around quite a bit, but they do stay in that cluster. I'm going to add a few more embellishments before I'm done with that one. And then for the embellishment that says poison, that sentiment, later on I add a dark gray border around it, but I don't think I did that on camera. It was kind of like a last minute thought. So I had the banners already cut out of some patterned paper, and then I was thinking that they were just a little bit too flimsy since they were important elements on the page. I thought that I would give them a little bit more substance, make them a little bit thicker. So I used the same die that I used for the patterned paper banners, and I cut out 2 white cardstock banners for each patterned paper banner. And then I used ATG adhesive. I attached those 2 cardstock banners together, and then I layered the pattern paper on top. And the cardstock that I used is 120-pound cardstock. For my background paper, I use 12 by 18 inch pieces of paper, and then I cut 6 inches off. The 12 by 12 inch paper that remains, that's my mixed media paper. And then the 6 by 12 inch paper is paper that I use all the time for different elements on my page. So that piece of 12 by 18 inch paper is very handy. And the paper that I use, it's 120 pounds. It's made more for copying purposes than for mixed media purposes, but I find that it's very economical since I use so much of it. And I have purchased this paper on Amazon. The price fluctuates insanely, so I sometimes hesitate to recommend it because there's times that it's like triple the regular price, and even the regular price is not super inexpensive, but it's just inexpensive per sheet of paper. But if it's currently available, I will put the link in the description box in case you're interested in checking it out. Well, I found some more embellishments to add to that top cluster. I decided I was going to try this flying witch out. I don't end up leaving that there either, but I do really like that embellishment. I also found some circular chipboard pieces. I have a skull, and then I have a small orange striped chipboard circle that I put at the top of the page. And I thought that that was a good addition. I like the way there's the repetition of circles around the page. There's also another one of those small orange striped circles in the lower right-hand corner. And then since I had so much of that chipboard, I was able to get a third one, which I put on the left-hand side. That way there's that common element in all the clusters. I also added some photo corners. I don't want to neglect to mention that because I used a punch, which you can see to the left of my layout, and that is an EK Success scalloped photo corner punch. I used some gray paper and added some photo corners where the corners of the photos were visible. I also added a gray and orange brad to the tiny tags on either side of the photos. So now I knew I wanted to add some mixed media to this layout, and it's a very limited palette. I have orange, gray, off-white, and black, and that's really it. And I was thinking I might want to add a blue color to the background, but I was just afraid that it wouldn't look Halloween enough. I know that I shouldn't worry about it being a traditional color, but I decided I was going to play it safe and make a gray background. So it ended up looking fine, but I'm still curious what it would have looked like if I used some blue in the background. I was thinking kind of a tealish blue. I looked through my shimmers paints looking for a really shimmery gray color. I don't happen to have one, so I looked in the other part of my mixed media stash, and I had a few gray and silvery sprays from some other manufacturers that I decided to try out on this background. So I'm using a piece of 120-pound smooth white cardstock. I've coated it with gesso, and then I used a pencil to kind of trace around the outside of that large cluster that I created so I knew where to put the mixed media. I started off with a Lindy Starburst spray. I used 2 different colors. One is called Frolic in the Black Forest, and one is called Gag Me with a Spoon Gray, and I used both of those colors on this background just so I would have a couple of different shades of gray. I'm using the packaging technique, and I'm just worrying about getting the sprays around the outside edge of where the cluster is going to be because of course you won't see the mixed media behind the cluster. I spread around the color, and then when I think there's enough color on the page, I use the heat tool and I'll dry that color so that I can then add some more on top and create some layers of color and some depth. I love to add splatters to my mixed media. So I go back in several times and add lots of splatters, especially when it's a Halloween layout. I don't mind if the background looks a little messier. Sometimes I try to keep the background clean, but I don't worry about Halloween layouts. I feel like you can get kind of messy with those. And then I used a technique I haven't used in a while. I used to use it on every layout, but I took some water and I sprinkled it on the background, and then I rolled a piece of paper towel on top that lifts up a little bit of the color, and then it creates some really cool water droplet effects. I hope that you can see that. It just makes the background look super cool. And when I do use this technique, I usually repeat it several times because you really can't see where the sprinkles of water are going until you roll the paper towel over the top, and then you can see where you have to add a little bit more water. This is the darker of the two Starburst sprays. This is the Frolic in the Black Forest. I wanted to add some touches of that. And then I also added some touches of a Tattered Angels Glimmer Mist called Lost Treasure. And then I allowed the entire background to dry very well before I started adding some stamping. So I started off with a grid stamp. It also has some dots on it, and I used it with some Staz On Ink in jet black. I don't know if you noticed, and they're not visible in the final layout, but there's a few spots, one on the lower, kind of like right-hand side, and then another one at, I don't know, about 2 o'clock on this kind of circular area that look a little bit different. And I think the reason is because I didn't put gesso or enough gesso in those spots, and that's why there's kind of a strange look to them. And I've sometimes left little areas like that before where I haven't put enough gesso down, but those are some pretty large areas. So I got lucky that you can't see them once I add the embellishments and the large cluster on top. You might not be able to see it very well, but just in case you saw that and you were wondering what that was. After I stamped with the grid stamp, I used a text stamp. It has some very tiny letters, and I stamped that around the background. And then I used a crackle stamp. That's one of my new favorite stamps. And then I finished it off with some dots. And I like the way the dots are a little bit darker than the other stamps, and I like using those different stamps. I think that it adds a nice variety to the stamping. So now I'm using my brand new stencil. I just ordered this. I was hoping to get a stencil that I had in 12 by 12 and a 6 by 6. I was happy to find out that it was available. It is the Crafters Workshop Scary Web stencil. I make a lot of Halloween layouts, so I thought I would get a lot of use out of this. And I think I like the stencil even better on this smaller scale. So I use some Master's Touch modeling paste and some thick body acrylic paint. I mix those together, a lot more of the modeling paste than the white paint, and then I used my metal spatula or metal palette knife and I spread the modeling paste through the stencil. I did a little bit of overlapping, but I tried to be careful so that I wouldn't squish the stenciling that I put down with the stenciling that I layered on top. And then I added a lot of ATG adhesive and I attached the cluster down. Now, something that I thought I had filmed, but I guess it didn't quite work out, is I added a title by taking 2 chipboard pieces and then covering up the center with some pattern paper and then using some thickers and creating a title that says "Lend a Hand." So the photos that I have here are of my daughter, Julia. Since she's really little, she's loved those little teeny tiny plastic hands you can get in like novelty stores. So every time that she sees them, she tries them out. So I have other pictures of her doing the same thing on other occasions. But in any case, I thought that that would be kind of a pun that would be a good title for this layout. So I added the banners into the layout, and then I started adding some jewels. I added some silvery gray jewels to the photo corners, and then I had these black pearls, so I added a black pearl between each of the centers of my 2 banners. And then I also added some orange pearls. I put one on the center of each of those 3 orange sparkly striped embellishments. And then I put a silver faceted jewel on the little sentiment that says "Happy Haunting," and then also on that skull circular embellishment toward the top. So the next day, I was thinking that I really needed to have some kind of a mat for this layout. Some layouts just seem to really need one. So I'm going to mat my mixed media background on 2 pieces of the pattern paper. I have this orange sparkly paper that I'm going to have in the background. And then on top of that, I'm layering this gray paper, and I've gutted both of those papers and I use that burgundy paper to mount both of them to. And then I'm going to mount my mixed media background on top of these two papers. And the gray is going to be a very thin border, and the orange is going to be the most prominent one. And I like attaching everything down to another piece of paper. I find it much easier to handle than trying to attach gutted pieces of paper to each other. They tend to just kind of flop around. And then I cut down my mixed media background a little bit. I have stickers on the back that keep track of the materials that I use. I had to recreate those, but that wasn't a big deal. I just didn't plan on matting my background. But I was happy with the way that mixed media background looked with the border around it. So as I told you, I struggled the most with that cluster on top of the two photos. I ended up taking away the witch and repositioning the skull and the orange circles, those chipboard circles that I put on earlier. And I knew I needed something else at the top of the layout, but I decided it wasn't going to be part of that cluster. I thought I could use a couple of bats. So I used this Stampin' Up bat punch. I punched out 3 bats out of a pattern paper that was a gray and black dot. And then I also punched out some bats from some white cardstock. I did the same thing I did with the banner. I layered the white cardstock on top of each other, and then I layered the piece of pattern paper at the top of those 2 white layers. And then after I had layered all the cardstock, I used my Distress ink in black soot once again, and I inked all those edges so you wouldn't see the white. I also trimmed away a little bit of the white cardstock where I hadn't perfectly lined the white cardstock up. And I thought these worked out really well for some quick and somewhat dimensional bats. There was a really large chipboard bat, but I tried it on the layout and it just looked a little bit too big. So I thought this was a better size for the bats. And then I ended up just using 2 of them. You don't always have to use 3 of things, I have come to realize. And I thought that those 2 bats just kind of finished off the layout. And this layout is complete. And here are some close-ups. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it. Please take a look in the description box where you'll find the links to the channels of Ronnie Sue, Kathy, and Sonia, who also create a Punched Out Thursday to Die For videos. Thank you again for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.